The next morning arrived in hush and haze. Dawn rolled over the hills like a soft lullaby, brushing gold across the dewless fields. The prairie had not seen rain in weeks, yet the rancher's land held on like a stitched-up wound, worn, but alive. He was already out by the corral, fixing a broken gate with the same steady hands he used to patch roofs and bury grief. The sun rose behind him, spilling light through the wooden slats like the ghost of stained glass, and down the road, walking slow. Single file they came, 5 children, 1 woman, no cart, no coats, no noise. They weren't begging, they were answering something unspoken. He didn't wave, just leaned on his fence post, squinting toward them like a man, unsure of what he sees as memory or miracle. The littlest child held a bundle of fabric, a patched blanket, or maybe all their belongings. The girl from yesterday walked beside him with a basket, empty but hopeful, and their mother. She kept her gaze on the dirt, like she didn't trust the ground not to vanish beneath her. He opened the gate, didn't say a word, just stepped aside. They walked in like ghosts, returning to a place they used to dream about. The wind barely moved. Even the chickens watched them pass. She spoke first. "We can clean, fix things, work for our keep." Her voice was low, not just with shyness, but restraint. Like if she offered too much, she'd owe too much. Like a woman who'd made bargains before and paid dearly. He nodded, pointed gently toward the shed. Roof leaks, coops leaning, gardens got more weeds than hope. No thank you, no soft welcome, but something warmer than either, dignity, and she understood. That day, the children worked like they'd been born in the dirt. The girl weeded with careful fingers. The oldest boy repaired fence rails without a word. The second youngest carried water in pots bigger than he was. Only the baby, no older than 4, wandered wide-eyed and barefoot, trailing the ranch dog like it was a guardian sent by God himself. And her, their mother, she moved. Like water. She didn't ask for tools, didn't wait for instructions. She patched the broken chicken door, washed the rusted pans, swept the porch with pine branches. There was grace in her stillness, and strength in her silence. By dusk, she had not rested once, not even to drink. The rancher watched from the barn window, thumb grazing the rim of his coffee mug. Something in him stirred, not pity, not even admiration. Something older, recognition. He saw how the children looked to her, not with fear, but anchor. He saw how she stood slightly behind them, always guarding, always ready to move again. He brought out a small pot of beans and 6 spoons. No fanfare, no sermon. They sat in the dirt again, just like yesterday. Only this time, he sat with them sooner. And after dinner, something strange happened. The middle child, a boy maybe 8, with a nose too big for his face, pulled out a sliver of charcoal and began sketching shapes in the dust. First a horse, then a house, then 5 stick figures, holding hands. The girl smiled, just barely. The mother didn't notice. She was folding laundry that didn't even belong to her. The rancher spoke softly to her then, for the first time all day. "Where'd you come from?" She didn't look up. "Nowhere you'd recognize. We passed through Denton. Before that, Fallow Ridge. Before that, a place with no name and less mercy." He nodded. Didn't ask why they left. He already knew. She asked, instead, "Why are you alone out here?" He paused, looked toward the hills. Some things die, some don't. The parts that stay, get quiet. She didn't reply, but in her silence, there was a kind of acceptance that felt like understanding. That night, he let them sleep in the hayloft. He offered the house 1 room at least, but she shook her head. "We're used to barns. They're honest." So he brought up extra blankets, lit a lantern, left a plate of dried apples on a crate. Before climbing down, he looked back once. She was tucking the children in with such gentleness, It made his chest ache. No lullaby, no stories, just hands smoothing hair and fingers brushing brows, like prayers made of skin and memory. And when she turned to the lantern, he saw it flicker in her eyes, the reflection of something she hadn't allowed herself in weeks. Safety. The next few days passed like wind through wheat, not loud, but sure. She repaired what needed fixing. The children fed the chickens and fetched eggs. The youngest tried to milk the goat once. It kicked him, and he laughed so hard he fell backward into the straw. It was the first sound of joy the rancher had heard in years that didn't come from a radio or a mockingbird. He started bringing small things back from town. A bar of soap that smelled like violets, a wooden comb, cinnamon for the morning oats. She never asked, never expected, but he noticed how she set the comb on the shelf like it was porcelain, how she sniffed the soap before hiding it in her shawl, how she rubbed cinnamon on the children's wrists just so they'd carry sweetness with them through the day. They didn't become family, not yet, but something was settling in the spaces between them, like quilt squares slowly sewn together in dusklight. One evening, while they all sat under the willow tree, he brought out his harmonica, played a low, trembling tune, not for show, but for peace. The children listened, eyes half closed. The mother turned her face slightly away, as if the music was too close to something she once knew. When he finished, no one clapped. No one needed to. It was the kind of music that said you're not alone here. As the moon lifted over the prairie, soft and pale as a promise, the rancher found himself watching them more than sleeping, listening more than speaking, feeling, perhaps, something he thought he'd buried with his wife and unborn daughter years ago. The ache wasn't gone, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full, heavy, yes, but full. And as the wind curled through the open window, carrying the scent of pine and bread and something like hope, he whispered aloud, only to himself, "Let them stay, Lord, let them stay." The wind that day carried more dust than mercy. It whistled low across the bone-dry prairie like an old song that had forgotten its words, stirring up skirts and slamming shutters. It whispered through the town of Larkspur like it knew secrets the folks had buried deep. Nothing moved fast here, not since the drought crept in like a thief, silent and sure, stealing shade, water, and wonder. The rancher came into town alone, as he always did, horse lean, hat dipped low, coat faded by sun and grief. He tied his mare outside the general store, gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder like one would give to an old friend, too tired to speak. Folks said he used to laugh once, said he had a voice like honey and a heart that poured out kindness like rain on a thirsty field. But hearts harden in silence, and time has a cruel habit of carving out the softest parts of a man. He didn't talk much anymore, not since that winter when death took more than his wife. He moved through the town with quiet footsteps, bought feed, salt, a bolt of cloth he didn't need, paused by the post office as if expecting something. But no letters came for a man who had stopped writing back. Behind the saloon, by the stacked barrels and broken crates, something shifted. Not a sound exactly, more like a ripple in the air, like when wind changes course but you can't see why. That's when he heard it, soft, careful, words carried not by boldness, but by need. "May we have your leftovers, sir?" He turned slowly, expecting maybe a drunk, or some boy with soot on his face and lies on his tongue. But instead, he saw 5 of them, 5 children, lined up like fence posts, thin arms, cheeks hollow, eyes wide, and waiting. No hands stretched out, no whining or begging, just quiet stillness. And those eyes, Lord, those eyes. The oldest stood tall, maybe 13, though hunger made him look less. Beside him, a girl cradled a younger one with knotted hair and bare feet. A 4th one clung to a ragged doll. The 5th, A boy no taller than a barrel stared up with such aching hope that the rancher forgot to breathe. He looked down at the half-eaten biscuit in his hand, then back at them. No one else stood near. No grown-up voice called them away. A door creaked somewhere behind the saloon. But the world stayed still. He didn't speak. Words seemed too fragile. Instead, he crouched down, tore the biscuit gently in 5 pieces, and offered it, one palmful at a time. They took it without a sound. Then, from the shadows, she stepped forward, their mother. She had the kind of tired that didn't live in wrinkles. It lived in the eyes. Sunburned skin, shawl pulled close, and a stillness to her presence that was neither fear nor shame. Just a woman too proud to ask and too empty to refuse. She didn't say a word, and neither did he. But something passed between them. Something as quiet as breath and as heavy as history. He stood, brushing dust from his knee, pulled another biscuit from his saddlebag, handed it to her, still warm from the morning's fire. She took it with a nod that meant, "Thank you," and, "I'm sorry," and "We're trying all at once." The rancher looked around, no one watching, and yet it felt like the sky itself was holding its breath. He walked a few paces away, leaned against a crate, and sat, not like a man doing a favor, but like a man sharing space, and slowly, the children came closer. They didn't talk, just chewed quietly, sitting in the dirt near his boots. The girl offered her last bite to the littlest one, who gave a sleepy smile before licking crumbs from his fingers. He noticed then how their clothes had been patched with care, how even in rags, they held themselves with a strange dignity. He'd seen hunger before, but this was different. This wasn't a moment of desperation. This was a life. He caught the mother watching him. Her eyes, dark like storm water, didn't flinch. She didn't smile, either. Just stood there, arms wrapped around her middle, trying to keep something inside from spilling. He looked down at the children, then back up. Still no words. But something settled in him, a crack, a knowing maybe it was, in the way they chewed slowly, as if afraid of finishing. Or how none of them asked for more. Maybe it was the mother's silence, how she let her children eat before she did, how she kept herself apart, even in this moment of shared survival. Or maybe it was that smallest boy, the one with eyes like pale moons, who crawled over to sit by the rancher's knee, not for food, just to lean, and the rancher let him. The sun dipped lower, painting the street in golden grief. Somewhere a bell rang, supper time, maybe, or someone calling prayer. But nothing stirred the little group behind the saloon. He reached into his sack, pulled out a strip of jerky, and passed it down the line. No one spoke, but he heard the mother's breath hitch. Just once, like she wasn't used to kindness that didn't come with a price. And it was then, in that soft silence, that he saw it. Her hand, shaking just slightly as she took a piece for herself, not because she doubted it, but because it had been so long since someone had offered something without expecting her to earn it. That broke him. Not in some loud, cinematic way, but in the way a fence breaks after years of wind, quiet, inevitable, almost a relief. He stood finally, brushed off his coat, looked at the woman, her mouth opened slightly, as if to say something, maybe thank you, maybe we'll be gone soon, but no sound came out. He just nodded once, then turned, walked slowly toward his horse, but halfway there, he paused, looked back. They were still sitting there, waiting perhaps, hoping. Still, he called out, soft as a prayer. "You hungry tomorrow?" The mother blinked, slowly, then nodded. He tipped his hat, climbed into the saddle, and rode off without another word. The dust rose behind him, but it didn't seem so heavy anymore, and the 5 children watched him disappear into the copper sky, their crumbs gone, their bellies not quite full, but for the first time in a long while, their eyes held something that looked a little like light. There are seasons on the prairie that don't belong to the calendar. They don't start with a solstice or a snow. They begin in silence, in a glance, in the moment when something begins to soften without a single word being spoken. That's what this was. The ranch hadn't changed much. The fences still leaned a little. The barn still creaked when the wind picked up. But the stillness inside it had changed. The kind that used to echo with loneliness now hummed with quiet life. The children had folded into the rhythm of the place, as if they'd always belonged to it. Morning chores, muddy boots, laughter that came and went like migrating birds. Not loud, not constant, but real. And she, their mother, moved through the ranch like light through lace. She didn't speak more than necessary. She didn't share stories. But there were days the rancher would catch her humming softly while stirring cornmeal or brushing out the little girl's hair. Songs without words, lullabies, older than memory. The bond between them, man and woman, was not sudden. It wasn't fire or thunder. It was coals, slowly gathering heat. It was the first time she accepted coffee from his hand. The second time she mended his shirt without asking. The third time she told him the baby's name. And then one day, something shifted. It came with fever. The middle boy, the one who had drawn horses in the dust, collapsed near the coop. At first it was just heat, they thought. Too much sun, not enough water. But by nightfall, he was burning from the inside, face blotched, breath shallow. She sat beside him, washing his forehead with a rag dipped in creek water, whispering comforts that shook at the edges. The other children huddled nearby, too quiet for comfort. The rancher rode into town that night under a moon so full it looked swollen. He knocked on the doctor's door, a man with whiskey breath and a ledger thicker than his heart. The doctor didn't even look up. "You're not kin," he said. The rancher's jaw clenched. "They need help." The doctor tapped the side of his chair. "They ain't registered. No county papers. No census. Just strays." The rancher left without a word, but rage followed him like fire chasing dry grass. He rode through the night, past Larkspur, past Old Mill Creek, until he reached the hollow near White Ash where the widow herbalist lived. They said she had potions, visions, strange ways, but he'd seen her save a man from snakebite once with only 2 roots and a prayer. She didn't ask questions. By sunrise, she was kneeling by the child's side, pressing cool leaves to his temples, whispering names of plants in a tongue older than the West. The rancher stood outside the barn, head bowed, hands curled into fists. She came to him then. The mother, her face pale from worry, hair uncombed, eyes wild with love and exhaustion. She didn't say thank you. He didn't need it. Instead, she whispered, "Why?" He looked at her, really. Looked at the scar near her collarbone, at the way her hands trembled but her spine stayed straight. "Because someone should," he said. She blinked like the answer hurt. The boy got better, not quickly. Not all at once, but enough that within 3 days he was asking for porridge and drawing cows with lopsided udders. That night, when the other children were asleep and the stars had come out full and blinking, she joined the rancher by the fence. They didn't sit close, but they sat long. After a while, she spoke. He wasn't always like that. Their father, he was gentle once. He didn't speak until he lost work. Then his temper grew like a bad root. Still, the rancher said nothing. We left in the middle of the night. Took only what we could carry. I carried the baby. The older ones carried memories. She looked down at her hands. There's parts of them I can't fix. Not with time. Not with love. But I try. He looked toward the barn, where 5 shadows slept under hay and hope. They don't need fixing. Just space to grow. She nodded, but there were tears she didn't let fall. Then, after a silence that wasn't heavy, but full of weight, "I don't want saving," she said. "Just space to breathe." He turned to her, voice like dusk. "Then breathe here." She didn't smile, but she stayed beside him, and in that shared stillness, The ranch felt full, not with noise or laughter, but with something deeper, the kind of fullness that comes after a hard rain, not loud, not joyful, but clean. The next morning, while fixing a loose shutter, he found it, a drawing folded, tucked behind a beam. It was done in charcoal, and the back of a flour sack. 6 stick figures. 2 tall, 4 small. A little square house, a chicken, a sun dot, and above it, scrawled in uncertain handwriting, home. He stood there a long while, long enough for the morning wind to pass twice. He folded it gently and slid it into the breast pocket of his coat, right over his heart. He didn't tell her he found it. Some things don't need saying. But that night, he left the lantern on in the barn, and for the first time, he placed a 6-place setting on the kitchen table. Not for dinner, just for when. Some mornings arrive with a hush, others with a shiver. This one came with a knock. 3 slow raps on the ranch door, too early for visitors, too firm for kindness. The rancher was already awake, had been since before the sun cracked the horizon. He'd poured water for the chickens, stirred oats, watched steam rise and vanish into cool air. She was in the barn, plaiting her daughter's hair with gentle fingers and soft hums. The knock came again. He opened the door, slowly, no hurry, and standing there, framed by the gray light of dawn, was a man who didn't belong. Long coat, dust-covered boots, a face like carved stone, and eyes that had forgotten softness. The children called him Pa, but they did not run to him. They did not smile. She arrived a moment later. She stopped short, her breath caught. Her daughter's hand tightened around her skirt. I came for what's mine, the man said. Not who, not them, what. The rancher didn't speak. He simply looked at the woman. Her hand shook, but her chin stayed high. They ain't yours anymore, she said, voice even. The man laughed, low and dry, like brittle grass snapping under boot. You think some fence and a soft-spoken stranger makes you safe? The rancher stepped forward, not threatening, not angry, just present. You left them, he said quietly. She raised them through fire. The man's lip curled. You playing savior. Now, cowboy. No, the rancher said. Just a man who sees what you couldn't. The man stepped closer, too close. You got no claim. I've got 5 reasons standing right behind me, the rancher replied, voice soft as snow, but there was steel beneath it. The children stood there, silent as fence posts, but not afraid. Not this time, because they'd seen love in cracked hands and quiet dinners. They'd felt safety in porch shadows and bedtime harmonica songs, and now they saw a man who didn't raise his voice, only his heart. The sheriff came, summoned by no one and everyone. Word had traveled fast, like it always does when something sacred is at risk. He arrived on a dusty gelding, boots still unlaced, stared at the scene. He's their blood, the sheriff said cautiously. The woman's voice broke, but not from weakness. Blood didn't keep them fed. Blood didn't sing them to sleep. Blood didn't pull fever from their skin or fear from their eyes. She turned to the sheriff. You ever see bruises on a baby? I have. He put them there. The sheriff's face twitched. The man spat near the dirt. She's lying. The preacher stepped forward then, old, shaky, but eyes clear. I've watched them, he said. Watched her walk through town with 5 children behind her like ducklings. Watched him fix her barn, not her heart. Watched them heal in silence. He pulled out a paper, old and folded. And I've witnessed this, a guardianship letter, signed, Notarized, by him, by the woman, and by the rancher, who hadn't said more than a line, but had done more than most do in a lifetime. The sheriff looked from the preacher to the man, then to the children, standing in a line, watching, waiting. He nodded. She stays. They stay. He leaves. The man stared, jaw locked. But he saw it, the line of townsfolk standing just beyond the fence, the dog growling low, the preacher's trembling hand on the paper, and most of all, the rancher, not angry, not armed, just steady, a man who wouldn't back down, not because of pride, but because of love. The man turned, walked out, didn't look back. Dust rose behind him and didn't settle for a long while. That evening, the table inside the ranch house was full, truly full. 6 places, 6 hands, passing bread, 6 voices, quiet, but no longer uncertain. The boy who had been sick leaned against the rancher's arm. The baby slept, curled on the rug near the fire. The girl, brushing her mother's hair with careful fingers, hummed a lullaby no one recognized, but everyone somehow knew. And she, the woman, sat beside the rancher, not behind, not across, beside. Her hand brushed his once, on accident. Or maybe not. He didn't speak, just let it linger. After the children were asleep, she joined him on the porch. They watched the stars blink into life. The wind was gentler than usual. "I didn't expect any of this," she whispered. "Neither did I," he said. She looked at him. "I thought all men were wolves, until I met one who guarded instead of hunted." He turned to her, eyes soft. "I thought I was done building things. Turns out, I was just waiting for the right ones to build with." She smiled then, not a small one, a full, wide, slow-breaking smile, like the sun cresting over frost. She laid her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, he let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, closing. Words spoken like a narrator. "And so, dear heart, know this, sometimes love doesn't ride in with banners or fire. Sometimes it begins in silence, in a shared meal, in a child's eyes that no longer flinch, in a hand that stays, even when it's easier to leave. Love is not always grand, but it is always brave, and when the dust finally settles, it's the quiet ones, the steady ones, who build the kind of home no storm can tear down."